225.
Avyaktoyamachindyoyam
Avyaktoyamachindyoyam
Avikaryoyamuchyate
Avikaryoyamuchyate
Tasmadevam viditvainam
Tasmadevam viditvainam
Nanushocidumarhasi
Nanushocidumarhasi.
225.1. The meaning of the words of the shloka. Avyaktoyam. Avyaktaha plus ayam. Avyaktaha, unmanifest. Ayam, this. Achintyoyam. Achintyaha plus ayam. Achintyaha, inconceivable. Ayam, this. Avikaryoyam. Avikaryaha plus ayam. Avikaryaha, unchangeable. Ayam, this. Uchyate, it is said. Tasmad, therefore. Evam, in this way. Viditvainam. Viditva plus enam. Viditva, having known. Enam, this, the self. Nanushochitum arhasi. Na plus anushochitum plus arhasi. Na, not. Anushochitum, to grieve. Arhasi, you deserve or you ought. 225.2. The meaning of the shloka. It is said that it is unmanifest, inconceivable, and unchangeable. Therefore, having known the self in this way, you ought not to grieve. 225.3. Bhāṣya.
Avyaktaha sarvakaranavishayatvād na vyajyate iti avyaktaha ayam atma. Ata eva achintyaha ayam yad hi indriyagocharam vastu tad chindavishayattvam apadyate ayam tu atma anindriyagocharatvad achintyaha avikaryaha ayam yatha kshiram दध्यātañcanādina vikāri na tatha ayam atma niravayavatvādicha avikriyaha nahi niravayavam kinjid vikriyatmakam drishtam avikriyatvad avikaryaha ayam atma uchyate tasmad evam yadhokta prakarena yenam atmanam viditva tvam na anushochitam arhasi hanta aham yesham maya ete hanyante iti.
Translation. Unmanifest because it is not the object of perception by any organ. For the same reason, it is inconceivable. Whatever is perceivable by the senses will become the subject of thinking. As this self is not perceivable by the senses, it is inconceivable. This self is also unchangeable, not like milk that changes its form into curd or buttermilk. Changeless also because it is without limbs, parts. Nothing that is without limbs, not composed of parts, is seen to be changing. As it is not subject to transformation, this self is known as immutable. Therefore, having known this self as described, you are not eligible for grieving, thinking, quote, I am the killer of these people, they are being killed by me, unquote. 225.4. Explanation. The description of the self is continued in this sloka. The first aspect is that it is unmanifest. What can be perceived by the senses, mind, or intellect is manifest. The self is not subject to any such perception. There are many statements in the Vedas to this effect. We have already seen one in our para 218.9, the mantra 312 of Katha Upanishad. Quote, that which cannot be reached by word, mind, or eye. Unquote. What is not subject to perception is also achintya, inconceivable. The word used in Shloka 218 was aprameya, incomprehensible. It is also immutable, as we have seen in Shloka 221. It does not undergo any transformation. It has no parts and therefore no change. The word uchyate, it is said, is significant. Bhagavan says that it has been said so by the Gurus, acknowledging the long tradition of rishis who have said the same thing in the Upanishads. We find this kind of acknowledgement throughout Gita. 225.5. Knowing the self to be thus, there is no scope for grieving, Bhagavan tells Arjuna. Let us recall that, deluded by misplaced affection, Arjuna had lost his sense of dharma, and Bhagavan had exhorted him to cast off his indolence. This exhortation had made Arjuna curious to know about the ultimate good. As an aspirant should have a clear understanding of what he is seeking, Bhagavan here gives out the core concept of Vedanta. This is called Sankhya, as explained in 2.10h4. Though this concept is the theme of the shlokas 11 to 30, the core ends here. 225.6. This instruction is for the whole mankind, for whom grieving is second nature. We seek happiness in the objects that the senses bring to us. We feel happy when we get them and unhappy when we lose them. Such happiness is short-lived. To be happy forever, there is only one way to realize the self. Says Chandogya Upanishad in 7.1.3, Tarati shokam atmavit. The one who knows the self overcomes sorrow. Mundaka Upanishad goes one step further in 3.2.9. Tarati shokam tarati papmanam. Overcome sorrow and sin. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad in 4.4.12 is more descriptive. Atmanam ched vijaniya dayamasmidi purushaha kimicchan kasya kamaya shariramanusamjuret. If a person knows, I am the Purusha, that he is the self, for getting what, for fulfilling what desire, whose desire will he run after the body and the objects of desire? Needless to say, that knowing here means realizing, as the self cannot be known in the usual sense of the term. 225.7. Instead of taking the meaning to be, therefore having known the self in this way you ought not to grieve, we can take it as, therefore having known the self you ought not to grieve in this way. The rules of Sanskrit grammar permit such an interpretation also. If we take the latter meaning, it would follow that now you are grieving because of your ignorance, and if you know the self, your sorrow will end. Realization of the self is the eternal release from sorrow that comes out of the repeated cycle of births and deaths. Nahi jnanena sadrisham pavitramiha vidyate. There is nothing here as holy as jnana, Bhagavan is going to say in Shloka 438. 225.8 Bhāṣya.
Atmanaha anityatvam abhivagamya idam uchyate.
Translation. Accepting the non-eternality of the self, it is said as follows. 225.9 Explanation. The eternality and the incomprehensibility of the self have been well described. It has also been stated that the realization of the self leads to the final release from sorrow. Bhagavan also showed the path for such realization as the refining of the internal instrument, following the teachings of the scriptures and Guru. However, A man with his mind always bound by the thoughts of the external world is not able to understand all this. With his worldly vision, he sees only the life beginning with birth and ending in death. Instead of realizing the self to be eternal, he takes it to be transient. In the next shloka, Bhagavan comes down to the level of that ordinary person and says that even then you do not need to grieve.